Jordan, what's happening, man? How you feeling, man?
I'm good, Sam. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Very excited to have our special guest on this week's episode, David Dann. David is a DJ and producer himself, but also the founder of the LA-based indie record label and company Mind of a Genius. They have an incredible track record. They helped find and break Zhu and Gallant. Grammy winning, Grammy nominated. There's some this man's definitely been there from ground floor artists all the way through a very elite level. So also want to congratulate him. Definitely encourage you guys to, if you haven't already, just premiered a music video, I think yesterday after having dropped this episode for You and Me. So Google David Dann, Dann, You and Me, and you'll see it come up. Had the fortune of being able to work with David on Knox and help with the rollout and production of some of the content surrounding this the song, music video, and that good stuff. So really excited to hear David kind of peel the curtains back into his process, not only as an artist, but as an entrepreneur. I guess the last thing I'll mention is that it was really great to see and hear his perspective as to this. He operates as an indie label, has helped artists break to the highest of levels. But then kind of the balance between indie versus majors, the harsh reality of what the competitive landscape really is and how to tap into the best of all worlds and not just see it as this either or scenario, but figuring out how you can kind of play into both of them. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, definitely, +1 to everything you just said. I also think generally when artists become executives, there's such a unique story every time for the artist that becomes an executive. So you'll see him mention it at first, and I kind of double down on it in the interview because making that decision is a very big one, saying, okay, I'm going to stop or take priority away from what I'm doing to help these other artists. So we kind of go into his decision making for why he did that. What he had to learn immediately when he made that transition from going to an artist to an executive and then to back again. And we also went into, like you were saying, Grammy campaigns for Zhu's Faded and Gallant's Ology. So I think we have a lot of lessons in this one, whether you're an executive or what to think about when you're becoming executive or starting your own label or working for a label. But we also have the same lessons or equal value lessons for being an artist. So there's just all around a lot of good insight in this, and I'm excited for people to hear it. It was an awesome interview. I literally said that right when we were done, that that was awesome. That's what I said to him. So there you go. There you have it from the man himself.
All right. Well, David Dann, without any further ado, let's get into it. David, what's good, bro? How you feeling, man?
What's up, Sam? Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, man. Super excited to have you on. I think for starters, one thing that I'm excited about in this conversation is that you've been able to, you kind of play on both sides, both on the business side as a label owner and founder and operator, as well as like a musician and producer yourself. Can you just take us back to like the very early stages? Because I think you started more on the side of music, not on the business side. So really just curious kind of your entrance into the music industry and what kind of really led to the founding of Mind of a Genius.
Yeah. So for most of my life, I've been going back and forth between the two constantly. I think a lot of musicians many of them are privileged enough to be able to pursue music because they are maybe taken care of on the financial side through their families, and then there's obviously a bajillion of them that are the opposite, and they're kind of like the hungry, starving musicians that you hear about at the age of 30 going into becoming a tennis coach or, something that just pays the bills and being like, fuck man, being a musician just didn't work out. That's the classic story. So, I think for me, there was this entrance to music through playing piano as a young kid, that I loved, mixed with having to make money as a necessity pretty early on in my life. So I didn't have the sort of privileged side. I also wasn't on the street. But I was definitely pretty squeezed on the amount of resources that were available to me. So I had to make do with what I had, and that I think mixed with music became this almost obsession of how do I make money and also do what I love at the same time, because I also grew up in a city with a lot of very wealthy people that felt very empty. So
where'd you grow up? Sorry.
So I grew up in Beverly Hills.
Okay, cool.
I was born in New York, but I grew up in Beverly Hills, and I was considered low class compared to, pretty much everyone else I went to school with. And the reason I went to Beverly Hills is because it's free schooling, K through 12. If you live there, and there's like an area that's very small that has apartments. So my mom made sure that we all lived there so we could get free schooling for the three of us. So I think again, the combination of both really allowed me to see both sides of life, if you may. I wanted to, be able to take care of myself, and I also didn't want to be one of these artists that felt like, I'll be fine just playing guitar or piano and not making anything of myself either. So I think I sort of strayed that middle space a little bit, and that sort of set up the rest of my life moving forward from that standpoint.
That's awesome, man. No, it's fun to kind of gone back and forth. I mean, when it came to the launching of Mind of a Genius, what was the impetus and what was the turning point where it's like, okay, A, I have this idea, I want to do this as a business, and B, it's like, okay, it's go time. Let's get going, make this happen. Yeah.
So the Mind of a Genius brand was started for playlists on my iTunes at the time, and that's how I would give out playlists or CDs to my friends. And I would put different Mind of a Genius playlists in different genres. And eventually, after doing that for a few years and started to make my own music, I started to self-release under that moniker because I just thought it was really cool and it applied to all my favorite artists. So why not reuse it? So that name continued on through high school and college as a podcast, and then a label of my own stuff, both not making any money. Just something cool that was a promo option for me to give to people. And then eventually, I always had my sights set on building a brand off of that name, but I didn't always know when or how it would actually begin. So the brand was set up far in advance of any sort of real financial gain or growth in that way. And then when I signed my first artist, that was when the company really came to light. Because we did it independently, and then eventually not. But in the beginning, we were really it was a forefront of the story. So that's how it started.
That's amazing. And then as far as starting to build out the roster and build it into what actually became a very successful independent label, can you start just by talking about how you went about finding some of the first artists you signed?
Yeah. So actually, funny enough, Zhu and I, in the very beginning of our sort of venture together, he was producing and I was DJing, and he'd come to my shows, and we were just friends through the music space. And our agent at the time was representing both of us, and he ended up being not the most clean with handling the way he dealt with our money, both of us. So I ended up managing Steven in the beginning and firing the agent who introduced us, which was kind of a weird one. And then we got a studio together, and it was just him and I producing separately for a very long time. Not very long time, but maybe for the first 6 months. And then after a while, I was like, yo, this kid's way better than me, and I can probably help him way more than I can help myself in what I'm doing right now. Let me try to do this. And I had already been trying to develop other artists before him, and some, were okay, some didn't work out so well. And this one I knew was really special because it especially lived in a scene that I knew really well, which is the dance music scene. So I decided to call it quits on my own stuff at the time and get back into just helping develop his artistry. And then that's when we did the whole Mind of a Genius Zoo deal. And, brought Jake on, who was the manager. I kind of went to label and creative focus role. And then once he came out and started doing really well, I just kept signing more stuff that I really loved, much of which I expected to go much further than it did. And still to this day, I know I expected it to go farther, but also learned why, it didn't. So I think it's cool that I've done the stuff I've done up to now, but when I look at the trajectory of what I'm trying to build, I see this as a 30-year thing, and most of the last 5 years has been just learning, versus necessarily like we have this great successful record company. I don't feel that like accolade, I think, much as a lot of people like to look at it like.
Right. I want to dive into a couple of things kind of based on the story you just told us. One, you sort of said that you felt like you wanted to help Zhu more than you wanted to help yourself. I can relate to that personally because I was an artist and decided to help one of my friends as the first artist that I ended up managing in college, and ended up getting into artist management afterwards as a career for a little bit. So I kind of want to dive into your mindset a little bit because I feel like there's such a misinformation, miseducation of the opportunities that people have in the music industry. Everybody kind of goes to artistry first because they kind of think that's the only way to be in the music industry because they don't know about publicists. They don't know about A&Rs. They don't know about managers. I guess my question is, at what point, what things were you thinking of when you kind of decided to help someone before you'd even help yourself? And how did you know to make that decision? Kind of like dissecting what that process was for you in order to take it to that level that you ended up taking it to.
So I think through a bunch of trials and tribulations of my own failures, I kind of came to a point where I knew what are the things in music that actually move audience and generate income. And there's really two things that matter in that space. One is, and one comes before the other, typically speaking, is a song that is undeniably replayable, which we refer to as hit songs in the music business. And then the other side to that is the image and the branding that you sell behind that song. And it was much easier for me to apply that level of thinking to an outside project or product than to my own stuff. Because when you're in your own body and you're trying to do it for yourself as an artist, you don't always know what's best. And that's why having a very brutally honest manager is the best thing you can do. As long as you're open to changing yourself to some degree, right, to meet market and be able to sell yourself, then you'll be fine. But in other words, it was just so much easier for me to apply those lessons that I learned on myself to somebody else, as long as they were open to listening. And he fortunately was, for the most of our time together for 7 years, an incredibly open book to all the suggestions and ideas that I myself had and Jake had to giving him. So that's a big reason why I think, candidly speaking, the separation was so difficult, was because that was a product that we created from inception. And it wasn't like someone who walked into my door like Gallant with this amazing voice and an EP out, and all I had to do was like kind of touch some things up and give some guidance and mentorship to. Obviously there's much more than that, but just comparatively speaking, there was a lot of heavy-handed work in the creation of that first project.
Right. And I guess just kind of going back to, you said you applied to some lessons to your artists that you didn't feel like you could apply to yourself. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what are some thought processes, some lessons that you kind of had to learn right off the bat that you didn't necessarily know when you were an artist, that you did have to learn when you started becoming someone who supports artists rather than the talent themselves?
Yeah, like for example, when you're in the shoes yourself, you're like, I need an agent right now, or I need a publicist right now, or I need this right now, or that right now, and you're constantly focusing on 100 different things because you're looking at other artists' success and you're wondering like, oh shit, how did that artist get there so quick? Or like, why did that artist all of a sudden pop off? And you're only seeing like the work at that point that's in front of you, but you don't know like all the steps that came before that. So I think for me, it was really important to help artists understand that process of what is important to focus on energy-wise and what's not important. And I think that alone is worth so much to an artist, because being one myself, I was able to like really, be like, look, dude, you don't need to think about, your photos right now, or who the publicist is, or what the agent is, because there is no agent, there is no PR, there's none of this until we have an amazing, quality of work to show, but also B, like there's depth to your project aesthetically with your pictures and your videos. So there's all these like pre-production things that as an artist, I don't think we always think about. Hence why you have, every other day you have someone that's like really hot for a second and then they're kind of gone just as quickly. So we try to build like long-term sustainability as much as we can, even though it's so hard to do because trends change so quickly. Mm-hmm. But those are some of the lessons, I guess, that are applicable.
Yeah, no, I love that. When it comes to building that, like that depth in branding and narrative and aesthetic, what tactically are you really focusing on, or what are like different questions you're trying to answer? Because I mean, in theory, it's great, but for our listeners and different artists and managers that are like, yeah, I want to do that. Like, what's your general like framework for approaching that? If you had to like deconstruct those different elements.
So I think like that's a great question, and that has also changed so much since I started. In the beginning, it was like very much about clean aesthetic and like high quality and logo design and sort of that whole like making it feel like really large and big. And then it all of a sudden went very quickly into like personability, like how personal you can be to the camera, how well can you talk to your phone, how well can you just like virtually connect with people, and social media has made it so it's like much more personal meaning. So I think now it's become a lot of that, like how much can you give of yourself, to the audience to let them in. Whereas before, if the artist was like 10 degrees separated from the fans, it actually was nice to have a superstar like that you couldn't touch. But it feels like right now everybody who's doing something really well is someone that's very also easily accessible, which unfortunately makes the artist's job in this moment very difficult, because you can't just be a singer, songwriter, composer. You have to be a full-blown entertainer at all times and give some people something to bite into. So that, I think, again, that's made it harder, and the landscape 10 times more saturated than when we started, because there's less things to get through in order to get your stuff out. But today there's everyone's on the same playing field, right? Superstar and major label or not. The only difference is they have more money to spend. But if your product is great, you have the same playing field. So that's kind of some of the things that I think matter with branding and aesthetics.
Right. One thing that clients used to bring up to me when I was in management was I used to kind of tell them that they did have to express themselves a little bit more on social media than they currently were, because it was like a post every 2 weeks or something like that on everything. And they didn't necessarily, which is a hard thing to ask of people, right? Like, you have to be more vulnerable with people on the internet. Like that's a legitimate thing in terms of branding and stuff. But I do feel like, and this is the one that people always brought up to me when they were arguing against that, which was the situation with Frank Ocean, where he comes into the picture like once every 2 or 3 years. He says like 2 things and then his album goes crazy. But I will say, for the people listening that think that that's a great tactic to do from the jump, Frank Ocean was also very vulnerable before he did that. He had a whole Tumblr blog. He was pretty active on a bunch of different stuff. And then he withdrew from that, which gave this sense of mystery. It wasn't, we knew who he was, then he withdrew. It wasn't like, we never knew who he was, and he was a mystery this entire time. Even her, who didn't show her face for however long and wasn't super active showing her face, she even had a brand and posted a lot, and even had an Instagram that was it was like a sister Instagram to her Instagram that actually had her real name on it and stuff, that had like 70,000 followers, you know? So it's just interesting that you bring that up, because it's like, there's kind of no way around it, especially at the beginning.
Well, yeah, for sure. Not the beginning. And also right now, because the biggest medium is TikTok, for sharing new music, like, that is all interactive constantly with the fans. So listen, those conversations about artists needing to be more active on social media are my least favorite to have. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than trying to tell an adult to post more and to do something that I don't want to do myself, right? So how can I preach something that I don't do to someone else? And that makes being, I think, a manager and an executive as you get older more difficult in general, which is one of the most difficult parts about the business for everybody. Is as you get older, you get less in touch, and you see new waves of people coming into the structure that are a part of the scene that you are disconnected from. So again, it's difficult for multiple reasons, but that conversation is really hard. Frank came up during a time when social media wasn't the biggest thing yet, and used different mediums to gain that audience. And also happened to make one of the most amazing albums in the last 10 years. All of those things help. His story of being with Tyler and writing to Beyonce, all of these things were planted or not planted or whatever, but helped bring the project to surface.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, one thing you mentioned, you kind of spoke to the fact that like there's, as you kind of deconstructed, you mentioned this notion of having like an undeniably repeatable song, dialing in on the branding, and then now you're starting to allude towards the kind of the marketing side of the equation. Like, obviously it's evolved and will continue to evolve, but like, how does that, as an emerging artist and having seen artists undergo such a rapid ascent, where do you, and even now just working on new artists, like where are you kind of putting focus towards with regards to trying to build an audience and build a fan base so you can get that momentum?
Yeah. Right now I've never seen anything like what's happening right now, because it feels like the only breeding ground for new audience in a real way is on TikTok. And if you know how to use that application and your money, and if you don't, then you're kind of left behind at the moment. All traditional ways of anything have kind of been broken down. So right now, it's one of our hardest parts is like trying to figure out where we're getting new fans and new listeners from. And those are kind of our day-to-day conversations in trying to figure out. So it's a great question, but the answer at this moment is trying to tap into other people's audiences and expose their audience, our audience. So whether that's gamers or whether that's NBA teams and their social media teams and getting them to put our stuff up, or TikTokers, like it's kind of just a mix of all of that. And then the other 50% is the incestualness that goes on through DSPs and the rest of the business. So
yeah. In that vein, how is it? I mean, the incestual, like that side of the business, operating as like an indie. And I mean, where do you see kind of like the value in being an indie versus when does it make sense for even as a indie record label to like partner with bigger labels?
I think it makes sense, or it has made sense in the past when you have something that's already, call it 5 or 10, 15 million plays deep, and you want to keep funding things to take them further, and you just can't afford to because you're not getting paid enough to match what the spend costs. So, you need a financier at that point. Other than that, I think majors obviously don't really play a big part in development. Nor do they need to. We kind of fill that gap with the artists that we go after and we try to sign. And now there's so many options for an artist because most distributors are giving advances and taking such little on the other side in terms of long-term copyright share or master ownership. So artists have a lot of different options in how they want to do deals and structure them. But we try to bring a level of cultural health to each artist in terms of like features or getting on other people's songs or obviously playlist support, but we're kind of scrunched up between a major and a distributor or a modern distributor. And we do the best we can at like finding things that will help our artists, like very microscopically speaking, versus like the here, there's 25 a la carte options at this company. Choose what you want, and we'll adjust our percentage to that. Or a major that says, here's $1 million. We own your master, and we're going to throw $200,000 at radio. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, then, see you later.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. And I think it's got to be nice too, from the artist perspective, being able to operate with kind of a more like boutique team, like know who they're talking about, not have to worry about like massive separate departments, when in reality it's a much more kind of like teamwork endeavor.
Yeah.
On your side too, I feel like there's also like you do bring very valuable perspective, having been so close on the actual like I mean, not only are you kind of like the founder of the label, but like you are a producer yourself. Like, your relationship with understanding like the sounds that do have that repeatability, like you're able to bring a different layer of like support to the artists on your roster in that regard. Like, from your perspective, like as you've continued to evolve in your taste, and I mean, even with the recent releases that you have, like what are certain things that you try to be intentional about in crafting your sound? And this is for kind of you as the artist, David.
Yeah. I think for me, I had a really hard time in the beginning of my DJ career figuring out if I wanted to go underground or commercial. I remember there specifically being this moment when I was seeing like the Afrojacks and the David Guettas and the Swedes like really start taking off commercially, and like the Jamie Joneses and the Solomons and stuff like really going the other way, and this middle space essentially started to dissipate. And I had to choose one way or the other. And luckily, that's when I had met Steven, because I didn't want to go one way or the other. I kind of wanted to be this like hybrid of both. And you can't really do that because America, much like a lot of markets, need to place people in a box, right? He's this, or he's that, or she's this, or she's that. So I think with my own stuff, I'm trying to walk this line of like, commercial, what a lot of people will like and listen to, and it can get your attention right away. But also have like remnants of real writing and real musicality behind it. So it's not like all the way like a commercial top 40, but it's also not Solomon or Jamie Jones, or I love those guys, but it's not as instrumental based most of the time. So I'm trying to achieve like the perfect combo of both, which actually that middle space right now feels like there's a huge opening for, and dance music specifically, because there's just not a lot going on in that space at the moment. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, in that vein too, like I know you got You and Me and some other like stuff in the works. Can you talk a little bit about what's kind of in store for the rest of the year? I mean, it's still as we enter 2021.
So I think we finished pretty much an album's worth of material right before quarantine started, and we started making a lot more music during quarantine. I was going to put out a lot more music by now, but the thing with dance music is that there's nowhere to play it out. It's really, really difficult to sell and to get people in. So our music lives in club.
Tulum right now seems like they don't give a fuck, dude. It's absurd.
Bro, I got a boy in Tulum right now. You wouldn't know there was anything going on. Like nothing.
No COVID in Tulum. I know.
But yes, agreed. The rest of the world, yes.
Yeah, so we couldn't. We felt like it was kind of it was not pointless, but how are people going to share the music if there's nowhere to hear it and play it out? So we just put a hold on everything. With that said, this year we're going to be putting out probably another like 6 or 7 songs by the end of the year, with a music video for You and Me, and visuals to follow and build the story. But I don't know really what the schedule is going to be overall, because again, I can't commit to putting music out in this space until there's an environment that supports it. Otherwise, it kind of just like lives in the air. It's hard for people to, I think, experience it the right way.
Yeah, no, it's tough too. I mean, it just goes back to the point as far as like marketing. I mean, the answer that you mentioned was kind of like blowing up on TikTok, and without, in the absence of like live shows, it literally does feel like it's just TikTok. If you're a new artist, it's like so competitive to grow on any other socials, and TikTok, like you can't go viral. But yeah, I mean, like the being able to actually play stuff out is such a critical part. Not even just dance music, but even just like any genre. Like, I mean, supporting for like headlining acts, like these are all tried and true tactics that have just been like taken off the table.
Totally.
Right.
Completely agree.
Right. Now that you're kind of getting back to reprioritizing your own artistry, I'm wondering if your career as a executive has helped you become a better artist, and if so, how so? Whether that be from the artists you were around, or whether that's from the energy of the things that you were going through at the time. Just kind of like, how does that contribute to your growing artistry at this point?
It's a good question. I think a lot of the things that I was disappointed with as an executive in my artist, I'm cognizant of when speaking to the rest of my team, whether that's the Knox team, whether that's my manager, whether that's the publicist. Like, I think understanding the things that my artists would or wouldn't do with their teams helped me see it that way with those surrounding me. And I think also, I mean, I approach my own artist stuff like pretty, like, I guess from like a pretty pure perspective, where I don't really want the outside stuff coming in. But I don't know. I think from the executive side, it's just helped me realize even more so how important a song is in building an artist's career, and also realizing that like there is no guaranteed advancement in one's career unless you can continuously put out hit songs. And most artists die and go away after they are unable to do that any longer. And that's just the nature of the music business. Like you know, realizing that you're not owed anything. You're lucky if you are able to get fans and people that support you to begin with. And that, you know, most likely that next generation that comes in isn't going to give a fuck about you because they have their own people that they grew up with. And that's kind of the old school versus the new school battle all the time is, oh, well, you think, you know, Lil this is better than Jay-Z? Like, well, you know, but like Jay-Z to us is different than whoever that little person is. The, you know, little baby or the baby is the current 15 or 16-year-old, right? So, I think just knowing, I think having like the wisdom of all those things really helps my approach to my own stuff. But no, I don't try to let it like dictate the way that I take things. But it's just helped me realize the process a little bit better.
Right. And part of it obviously is you growing as a person and how that affects the music in itself, as music is an extension of who you are. And I imagine that even things that don't necessarily seem like they're directly correlated with how you may put together a record, it may end up changing how it sounds because you've grown as a person in general, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Yeah. Cool. So I kind of want to dive into the Grammy win and the Grammy nom that you've had with Zhu and Gallant. I guess, I mean, this will be a big question for both of them, but I guess kind of one at a time. What was the campaign like, whether that's marketing / Grammy campaign is what I say in general, if it culminates in a nomination or in a win.
Right.
So I guess for those two artists, what were their Grammy campaigns like? And what were some of the inflection points that you think kind of led to those results? So
everything was Zhu and Faded. That song was already just like an international bomb at the year. So I think that teed it up pretty nicely. We ended up giving the record to Columbia as a license, and they were the ones that really headed the Grammy campaign. But, you know, that song was already on its way and on so many charts at that point where it was kind of like impossible to avoid.
Right.
And dance music, again, is not so large that if you have like if you're one of the 5 hits that year that occur, then, you know, you're really at the forefront of stuff. And then with Gallant, I think we knew we had this just amazing album called Ology from him. And if we got it in front of the people at the Grammys, they would love it. And luckily, with the help of Felicia, who was our publicist at Warner at the time, she was really able to get it in front of all the right people. And Gallant had done stuff with Seal and John Elton John that year. And it had a couple of very big moments live on tour as well, with John Legend, even though I came a little bit after. But those, like all those moments, I think throughout the year really helped give us the story to go to the Grammys with and get them intrigued.
Yeah, it's interesting because they both got there 2 completely different ways. Like, I think we all kind of know what it feels like to see a song or to see an artist get so big. It's like, oh, they have to be nominated. Like that,
Right.
they just had such a massive year. They've got to be nominated. The music is good. It was a massive success, very clearly, and we know what that looks like when it comes out, right? Like, we know who's going to be nominated for a Grammy. We know what some songs are going to be nominated for a Grammy. Some of them are just like, oh, that makes sense completely.
Right.
But then for Gallant, it sounds like there was also some strategizing involved there to be like, hey, this album is really special. How do we get it in front of the right people? Which I think is both super interesting ways in order to get kind of to the same result.
Well, we knew Gallant was just such a special talent. And if we were able to give enough things to talk about surrounding him, that people would listen. So we spent a lot of money doing those things and setting those things up and knowing that they would be successful. And accompany the album itself really well. So, you really got to like believe in that artist unconditionally and radically to go and do those things and even take the bet. Because a lot of the time it doesn't work. But with him, it was like when you saw him perform live, it was just this like religious experience.
It's funny. His head's like right over your shoulder. I just realized. On your wall. Yeah, I was like, oh, there he is right there. You're looking at it. There you go.
So in this project, what we did was, and in this one.
That's funny, yeah, the right timing. So yeah, that was probably the biggest contributing factor for the Gallant campaign.
That's awesome. So, I mean, I guess one kind of, as we come towards the close here, I mean, I'm interested in your perspective because it does seem like indie labels have been getting a lot more shine. I do think oftentimes it is interesting because if you do look at like the market share of like the top 100 or like the Billboard Hot 100, like it still is like heavily like mass majority, like 90% plus dominated by like major labels. Do you still see over the course of the next 5?
Let me ask a clarifying question. When you say dominated by major labels, do you mean JVs as well that are under major labels, or do you mean major labels themselves?
It's combination, I presume.
Combination. Okay. Just wanted to clear that for the listeners.
Yeah. Do you see indie labels starting to take back more of that throne, potentially per like Jordan's caveat, without the need of a joint venture? Or do you just see, I guess, like do you see a power shift occurring at all between majors and indies getting more of that market share on their own?
I don't know my full 1,000% honest feedback.
Yes.
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. I think as long as it remains as difficult as it is to make real money off streaming for artists, and major labels have the backing of corporate money to spend on signing those artists, there's always going to be this like moment of eyes wide open. This is a life-changing moment for me if I sign with this major, instead of pursuing it myself. Because the likelihood of pursuing yourself independently and actually making it is so small compared to the chances of you just making this money from this major. And essentially buying yourself out. That divide is so vast that, especially in a space where there's nothing guaranteed as an artist, there's no job, there's, like, this is in Germany where they pay you like a salary for being a musician, and that's a part of the culture. There will always be this need or this want for a big check because it's too hard to make money off streaming. And the majors control most of the streaming charts anyways. So there is this massive monopoly that's happening. And in order for an artist to even recoup a fraction of something that they spend on their project, you got to hit $1 million streams. And hitting 1 million streams, major or not major, is not easy. So, and 1 million streams, $3,000 to $4,000, right? You're not talking 40 grand. So that makes it really, really difficult to exist in that middle space.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
No, I mean, I think it's a strong reality that I think a lot of people too, it's often very much like over glamorized with regards to like being indie, staying indie, when in reality, oftentimes beyond just the competitive advantage that some of these companies have, I mean, it's just the resources to make that massive push. So with that said, man, David, thank you so much for coming on. I think everything you've been able to accomplish and are still lots ahead of you. So really excited to see it as things continue to evolve, man. And excited to hear you play out one of these records once that's a thing again.
Me too, man. Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you, Jordan.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Man, well, that was a great episode. I really enjoyed hearing his perspective on breaking artists, the importance of really trying to figure out those songs that have that kind of repeat factor, dialing in on the aesthetic, on the branding. I mean, I think he's a really smart entrepreneur, looks at it from a very artist-centric perspective and focuses a lot on the art and the quality of the product. But then also is able to couple that with his deep understanding of the business end and how to really build the snowball and get the dominoes falling to the big bag.
Exactly. That's all as long as it leads to the big bag and the dominoes are falling to that big bag, you're going in the right place.
There it is.
But yeah, man, I thought it was a super informative and awesome interview. I think one thing that sticks out to me immediately is how Zhu and Gallant got to the Grammys in two different ways. How, Zhu's Faded was a little bit in your face. It was, we all know those songs, those albums, those artists who are going to be nominated for Grammys. It just only makes sense to. If they didn't, it would be like entirely huge snub. I think that was the case for Zhu. For Gallant, there was a little bit more strategy and finesse there, which I thought was a super interesting thing to kind of dive into. And also, we've seen artists become executives, but we haven't seen many artists go back to their artistry. And I think that's super interesting and awesome, actually, because he learned a lot as an executive. He learned a lot hearing a lot of other artists, working with a lot of other artists, and is now able to take it to the next step to say, okay, this is what I want to do with my artistry now. I know what I want to do with it, and I want to take steps towards doing that at the same time as being executive. I just think generally that's a super interesting route to take. People always say, all people all people in the music industry wanted to be artists or were artists at some point, right? And I kind of talk about that in the episode a little bit because it's all we know. But it's really awesome that he's going back to it and doubling down on it. And I'm super excited to see what happens in 2021 and moving forward.
1000%. Well, appreciate y'all for tuning in. That's it for this week. We out.